For the entire 5 years I spent desperately, exhaustingly trying to mold myself into the perfect, acceptable daughter-in-law for the Kensington family, I felt as though I was holding my breath at the bottom of a freezing, dark ocean. When I married my husband Julian, I didn't just marry a man. I married a sprawling, suffocating, multi-generational corporate dynasty. The Kensingtons were old, deeply entrenched, untouchable money. They were the kind of aristocratic, East Coast family that communicated entirely through sharp, passive-aggressive remarks, incredibly expensive but chillingly impersonal gifts, and a terrifying, sociopathic obsession with public optics, legacy, and social standing. Julian's mother, Victoria, was the undisputed, terrifying matriarch of this sprawling empire. From the very first day, Julian brought me to their massive, heavily gated stone estate for a formal Sunday brunch. She treated me like an unfortunate, slightly embarrassing charity case her golden boy son had picked up off the street. I was a dedicated, passionate pediatric nurse from a hardworking, blue-collar steel mill town. I completely lacked the Ivy League pedigree, the massive offshore trust fund, and the ruthless, cutthroat, social climbing skills she demanded from anyone who dared to attach themselves to the pristine Kensington name. She would introduce me to her wealthy country club friends with a tight, condescending, diamond-hard smile, saying, "This is Sarah. She wipes noses and cleans bedpans at the local public clinic. Isn't that just so quaintly noble?" But I loved Julian deeply, or at least I fiercely loved the charming, attentive, fiercely protective version of him he so flawlessly presented to me during our courtship. Whenever Victoria made a cruel, calculated jab at my clothes, my upbringing, or my career, he would wait until we were alone in the car, pull me close, kiss my forehead, and apologize profusely. He promised me, looking deep into my eyes, that we were an unbreakable, unified team, that his parents' toxic elitism didn't matter to him in the slightest, and that we would build our own beautiful, independent, loving life together far away from their shadow. I believed him with every single fiber of my being. I swallowed my pride, I bit my tongue, I attended the miserable, stuffy charity galas in uncomfortable heels, and I let myself be slowly, methodically diminished, all in the misguided name of unconditional love. When I finally found out I was pregnant after 2 agonizing, silent years of negative tests, invasive fertility treatments, hormone injections, and crushing monthly heartbreak, I thought everything was finally, permanently going to change. For a brief, fleeting, beautiful moment in time, it felt like the thick, suffocating ice surrounding the Kensington family had finally fractured. Victoria actually smiled at me with genuine, uncharacteristic warmth when we nervously announced the news over dinner. The very next day, she immediately sent over a wildly expensive hand-carved vintage French crib and an entire team of interior decorators. Julian seemed absolutely ecstatic, kissing my stomach every single morning before work and whispering to the baby. The suffocating, constant, buzzing tension in the family seemed to evaporate overnight, completely replaced by the unified, thrilling anticipation of a Kensington heir. I was foolish and naive enough to believe that bringing a child into the world would finally make me a permanent, respected, protected member of their impenetrable inner circle. I spent the first 18 weeks of my pregnancy floating on a cloud. I painted the nursery a soft, warm, buttery yellow, meticulously picked out names in a leather-bound journal, bought tiny socks, and allowed myself to feel a profound, overwhelming, all-consuming sense of joy. For the first time in 5 exhausting years, I finally, truly felt safe. But safety is a dangerous, fragile, lethal illusion when you are surrounded by people who do not possess a human soul. At exactly 19 weeks and 4 days, my entire world violently, catastrophically collapsed into a black hole. I was in the middle of a grueling 12-hour shift at the busy pediatric ward when the cramping started. It wasn't a dull, manageable ache. It was a sharp, terrifying, blinding pain that radiated viciously through my lower back and down my legs, followed immediately by an unmistakable, horrifying, heavy rush of warmth. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor of the staff restroom, clutching my stomach. I was rushed downstairs to my own hospital's emergency room on a gurney, bleeding heavily, sobbing uncontrollably, screaming for someone to call my husband, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years to save my baby. Julian arrived an hour and a half later. He didn't rush through the double doors looking frantic, disheveled, or terrified for his wife and child. He casually strolled into the chaotic emergency room, wearing his perfectly tailored, wrinkle-free charcoal work suit, checking notifications on his Rolex, looking far more annoyed by the sudden, messy inconvenience in his pristine schedule than devastated by the horrifying reality unfolding on the hospital bed. The incredible doctors and nurses, my friends and colleagues, did absolutely everything medically possible, but my body was failing. It was too late. I lost the baby. The physical pain of the emergency surgical procedure was excruciating, a searing, burning agony that tore through my core. But the emotional agony was something I cannot even begin to accurately articulate. It was a suffocating, crushing, absolute, infinite darkness that swallowed me entirely whole. I felt like I had died on that operating table with my child, leaving only an empty, breathing shell behind. I was officially admitted to the hospital for a mandatory 3-day stay to aggressively monitor a severe, life-threatening uterine infection and massive blood loss. I was broken into a million microscopic pieces. I needed my husband. I desperately, fundamentally needed the man who promised to protect me, to sit in that uncomfortable vinyl plastic chair, to hold my hand, to cry with me, to stroke my hair, to help me navigate the absolute darkest, most terrifying, devastating moment of my entire life. Instead, on the morning of my second day in the hospital, as I lay trembling violently in a sterile, freezing bed hooked up to 3 different IV bags, powerful antibiotics, and a beeping heart monitor, Julian walked into the room. He wasn't wearing the crumpled, unwashed clothes of a grieving, shattered father who had spent the agonizing night by his wife's side. He was wearing a crisp designer cashmere travel sweater, tailored slacks, and he was holding a heavy, packed, monogrammed leather duffel bag. He stood at the exact foot of my hospital bed, deliberately cowardly avoiding my puffy, red, heavily tear-stained eyes. He cleared his throat, checked his watch again, and casually informed me that his parents' annual, highly exclusive 2-week family retreat to Paris had been booked for over 6 months, and Victoria was aggressively, absolutely insisting that he still attend the trip. It's entirely non-refundable, Sarah, and the private jet charter is already waiting on the tarmac, he said. His voice was completely flat, monotone, and entirely devoid of any recognizable human emotion. He sounded as if he were discussing a canceled dinner reservation at a mid-tier steakhouse, rather than the tragic, bloody death of our unborn child. My mother says it will be good for my mental health to get away and clear my head after all this unfortunate stress. The doctors and nurses here are taking perfectly good care of you. You're in good hands with your little work friends. I'll call you from the first-class lounge when I land at Charles de Gaulle. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words didn't compute. I begged him not to go. I sobbed so hard and so violently that the heart monitor alarms started blaring in the hallway. I physically sat up, ignoring the stabbing pain in my abdomen, and clutched the thin, scratchy hospital blanket in my white-knuckled fists, pleading with him to stay with me, to grieve the child we had just lost together, to just be my husband for one single day. But his face was an impenetrable, terrifying mask of cold, sociopathic indifference. He looked at me not with pity, but with profound, unconcealed disgust at my emotional display. He gave me a quick, sterile, obligatory kiss on the forehead that felt like a block of ice, pressing against my skin, picked up his heavy leather bag, and walked out the heavy wooden door without looking back once. He literally left me alone in a cold hospital room, actively fighting a raging infection and mourning the death of our baby, while he boarded a champagne-soaked flight to France. For the next 24 hours, I was completely, deeply, terrifyingly numb. I lay in the dark, staring blankly at the porous acoustic tiles on the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic, mocking beeping of the machines keeping me alive, feeling entirely, utterly hollowed out. I was a ghost. Julian didn't answer my dozens of desperate, pleading text messages. He didn't call. Victoria didn't call to offer a single fake word of condolences. Chloe, his sister, didn't text. I was entirely abandoned, discarded like a broken, useless incubator by the very people who were supposed to be my lifelong family. On the long, agonizing afternoon of the third day, desperate for a tiny fleeting distraction from the suffocating, crushing, unbearable weight of my grief, I picked up my phone from the bedside table and opened Instagram. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a mindless, endless scrolling escape to shut my racing, traumatized brain off for 5 minutes. But the universe has a brutal, unforgiving, surgical way of forcing you to look at the absolute, ugly truth when you need to see it the most. The very first post at the absolute top of my feed was from Julian's younger, deeply spoiled, influencer-obsessed sister, Chloe. Her account was public, a highly curated shrine to her own exorbitant wealth. It was a carousel of high-definition, professionally edited photos from their first extravagant night in Paris. The first photo was a gorgeous, sweeping, cinematic shot of the Eiffel Tower, sparkling brilliantly against the dark night sky. The second photo was a group shot taken inside Le Jules Verne, an incredibly exclusive, Michelin-starred restaurant located inside the tower itself, a place that requires reservations a year in advance. There was Victoria, smiling her icy, triumphant, predatory smile, wearing a massive diamond necklace. There was Julian's father, Richard, holding up a glass of expensive vintage champagne and a cheerful toast, and there was Julian. He was looking incredibly handsome, deeply relaxed, and ecstatically, genuinely happy. His face was flushed with expensive wine and pure joy, and his arm was wrapped tightly, intimately, possessively around a beautiful woman's waist. The woman was Elise. Elise was Julian's co-worker at his elite financial firm. She was a glamorous, stunningly beautiful, generational wealth heiress whom his mother had always openly, loudly, and aggressively adored. Victoria frequently invited Elise to their private country club events, always making sure to seat her directly next to Julian at dinner parties, completely ignoring my presence. I had always felt a deep, nagging, primal, paranoid insecurity about her presence, an animal instinct that something was horribly wrong. But whenever I brought it up, Julian had repeatedly, masterfully, and cruelly gaslit me. He called me crazy, overly jealous, hormonal, and insecure. He swore on his life she was just a platonic colleague. But in this high-definition photo, zoomed in on my glowing screen, there was absolutely no denying the horrific, undeniable truth. Elise was leaning her entire body into Julian, her head resting intimately on his shoulder, wearing a stunning, plunging emerald silk evening gown. Julian's hand was resting firmly on her hip, his fingers splayed. Sitting directly across from the happy, glowing couple, smiling in absolute, joyous, beaming approval, were his parents. The caption underneath the photo read, "Magical family dinners in Paris are the absolute best. So incredibly happy to finally have the whole, perfect crew together. Paris nights family first, the real deal." My heart didn't just break, it completely, violently pulverized into microscopic dust. The realization hit me with the staggering, breathtaking force of a physical, blunt force blow to the chest, instantly stealing all the oxygen from the small, sterile hospital room. The monitors beside my bed spiked wildly, registering my skyrocketing heart rate. It wasn't just that Julian was having a dirty, secret, cliché office affair. It was the staggering, psychopathic, monstrous reality of the entire meticulously orchestrated situation. His entire family knew. They didn't just know about her. They actively approved of her, facilitated the affair, funded it, and were currently celebrating it in another country. While I was lying in a hospital bed, physically bleeding onto medical pads, deeply traumatized, and actively mourning the death of a child I had wanted with all my soul, my husband and my in-laws had packed their designer Louis Vuitton bags and taken his mistress on a luxury, romantic family vacation. They had already replaced me. They had probably been meticulously, patiently planning to replace me for months, just waiting for the right moment. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone until my vision blurred and my eyes burned like fire, but I didn't cry. I had already cried out every single, solitary tear my dehydrated, exhausted body possessed over the devastating loss of my baby. What replaced the tears in that exact moment was something entirely different, something ancient, primal, and terrifying. It was a cold, absolute, flawlessly sharp clarity. The suffocating, paralyzing grief that had been drowning me for 3 days suddenly, violently flash froze into pure, unadulterated, diamond-hard, blinding, homicidal rage. I hit the red emergency call button for the nurse. When my colleague rushed in, looking concerned, I demanded the discharge papers immediately. I told her I was checking myself out against medical advice. The attending doctors rushed in and tried to argue with me, warning me of the severe, lingering risks of the uterine infection and the massive blood loss, telling me I could collapse. I ignored every single word they said. I signed the legal waivers with a perfectly steady, unshakable hand. I pulled the IV needle out of my own arm, ignoring the blood dripping down my skin. I stripped off the hospital gown and changed into my sweatpants. I wasn't a grieving, pathetic, discarded victim anymore. I was a woman who had just realized she was legally bound to a family of absolute, undeniable monsters, and I had exactly 13 days to completely, ruthlessly orchestrate my escape and their total destruction before their return flight landed. I took a quiet, unremarkable taxi back to the massive, echoey, 5-bedroom suburban house Julian and I shared. The heavy silence of the house used to feel deeply lonely when he supposedly worked late at the office, but now, it felt like a tactical opportunity. I didn't sit down. I didn't rest my aching, bleeding body. Driven by a pure, adrenaline-fueled, burning fury that completely masked my intense physical pain, I walked straight into Julian's immaculate, leather-bound home office. I locked the heavy oak door behind me. I systematically, methodically tore through his mahogany desk, dumping drawers onto the floor. I found his heavy, locked fireproof safe hidden in the bottom drawer behind a stack of files. I pulled it out and stared at the digital keypad. I tried his birthday, nothing. Our anniversary, nothing. His mother's birthday, nothing. Then a sickening, intuitive thought crossed my mind. I typed in Elise's birthday, April 12th, 0412. The lock clicked a bright, cheerful green. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, I hit the absolute, undeniable motherlode. I found exactly what I needed to completely destroy him and his family. Paper bank statements for a hidden, high-yield offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a secondary prepaid burner cell phone, and highly confidential sealed legal documents detailing the massive trust fund his parents had strictly, legally forbidden me from ever accessing, or even knowing the exact amount of. I turned on the burner phone. It wasn't even password protected. I opened the text messages and read through them, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The sheer, terrifying depth of the betrayal was staggering. Victoria had been actively texting Elise for over 8 months. She called Elise, the brilliant, sophisticated daughter I always truly wanted, and openly, casually discussed aggressive legal strategies on how to maneuver me out of the marriage with the least amount of financial damage to Julian. But the texts between Julian and Elise were what truly sealed his absolute fate. Julian had been actively planning to serve me divorce papers the very moment the baby was born. He fully intended to use his family's massive, limitless wealth and high-powered legal team to aggressively fight me in court, claim I was an unstable, unfit, working-class mother with postpartum depression, and take full legal custody of the child so that Elise could raise my baby as her own in their elite, wealthy social circle. The tragic miscarriage hadn't been a heartbreaking loss to them. It had been a highly convenient, incredibly lucky, problem-solving early exit strategy. One text from Victoria to Julian, sent on the exact day I was admitted to the hospital bleeding, read, "It's a tragedy, of course, but perhaps it's a blessing in disguise, Julian. Now you don't have to deal with the messy, drawn-out custody battle with that woman. Pack your bags, darling. Elise is so excited for Paris, she bought a new wardrobe. Let the nurses handle Sarah." I sat on the cold hardwood floor of his office for 2 hours, surrounded by the paper proof of their absolute sociopathy, and I formulated a flawless, scorched earth, totally destructive plan. I didn't call him to scream. I didn't leave a hysterical, emotional, weeping voicemail for him to play for his mother and Elise to mock over champagne. I operated with the silent, lethal, terrifying efficiency of a ghost. The very next morning at exactly 8 a.m., I sat in the plush, glass-walled office of Diane Sterling, the most ruthless, aggressive, feared, and expensive divorce attorney in the city. She was a legendary woman who made her living completely destroying wealthy, arrogant, cheating men. I dropped the burner phone, the printed offshore bank statements, and the trust fund documents onto her glass desk. I told her the entire story without shedding a single tear, because I had the undeniable physical evidence of his hidden assets, the written proof of infidelity, and the massive financial paper trail, proving his parents were secretly funneling him money to fund his mistress using marital funds to hide it. Diane's eyes lit up with predatory glee. She moved with terrifying, immediate speed. Within 48 hours, we filed for an emergency ex parte freeze on all joint financial accounts with a sympathetic judge. I went to the bank in person, and legally, rightfully withdrew my exact half of absolutely everything we had built together, leaving his primary checking and savings accounts with a balance of exactly $0.00. I canceled every single joint credit card, reporting them as lost or stolen. I removed his name from my car insurance and the utility bills. Then I rented the absolute largest commercial moving truck I could find in the state. I called my 3 older brothers, who were rough, massive, highly protective men who worked construction in my hometown. When I sat them down and told them what Julian had done to me in the hospital, they were absolutely seething with a quiet, dangerous, violent rage. They drove down that night, armed with dollies and tool belts, and we spent 3 grueling, exhausting days completely, systematically gutting the 5,000-square-foot house. I didn't just pack my clothes, my books, and my jewelry. We packed the expensive custom living room furniture I had meticulously picked out, the high-end kitchen appliances, the expensive artwork on the walls, the massive espresso machine, the Persian rugs, the televisions, and every single sentimental item in the home. We unscrewed the expensive smart light bulbs he bought. We took the toilet paper off the rolls. We stripped the massive luxurious house down to the bare, echoing, empty drywall. When we were done, we left absolutely nothing but dust motes dancing in the sunlight and heavy indentations in the plush carpets. The only room in the entire 5-bedroom house I strictly forbade my brothers from touching was the nursery. I left the half-painted soft yellow walls, the neat stack of unread, pristine baby books, the folded tiny clothes, and the empty, expensive vintage French crib exactly as they were. It stood in the exact center of the massive empty house as a haunting, silent, devastating, psychological monument to the innocent child he had completely abandoned, and the beautiful, trusting life he had so callously, violently destroyed. On the pristine, empty marble kitchen island, directly in the center, I left a single, thick, heavy manila envelope. Inside were the freshly filed, aggressive divorce papers, the printed, high-definition, color screenshots of his sister's Instagram post from the restaurant in Paris, and a dozen printed pages of the most damning sociopathic text messages between his mother and his mistress regarding my baby. On the very top of the stack of papers, resting right in the center so it caught the light, I left my massive diamond wedding ring and my engagement ring. I moved to a completely different city, 3 hours away, signing a lease on a highly secure, beautiful apartment under my maiden name. I changed my phone number, completely deleted all my social media accounts, closed my email, and vanished entirely from their world into thin air, leaving no forwarding address. 13 days after he kissed my feverish forehead and left me bleeding in the hospital, Julian returned from his romantic, luxurious, family-approved Parisian getaway. I wasn't there to witness it, but Diane, my ruthless lawyer, gleefully informed me of the absolute catastrophic, apocalyptic chaos that ensued the moment his first-class flight landed. It started at Charles de Gaulle Airport before they even left. He tried to buy a coffee and a magazine before boarding, and his joint platinum Amex was humiliatingly declined. He tried his visa, declined. He assumed it was a fraud alert. He arrived at the house exhausted, jet-lagged, expecting a docile, weeping, broken wife waiting for him on the couch. Instead, his key opened the heavy front door to an echoing, completely empty, cavernous house. The sheer, terrifying panic must have been exquisite. A cold, clammy sweat breaking out over his entire body as he sprinted frantically through the empty living room, the empty dining room, his footsteps echoing loudly until he found the stark white envelope and the sparkling ring sitting alone on the kitchen island. And then he found the untouched nursery, He desperately, frantically tried to contact me. When he realized my number was completely disconnected, he started sending hundreds of frantic, panicking, unhinged emails. He pleaded for me to call him, claiming the photos were completely misunderstood, blaming his sister for posting them without his permission, blaming his mother for inviting Elise against his will, begging for just one single 5-minute chance to explain himself. He realized that the hidden offshore money was legally exposed, that the texts about taking my child were in the hands of a lawyer, and that he was completely, utterly trapped. I never replied to a single word. I let Diane handle every single, solitary piece of communication, effectively walling him off in his own personal, inescapable legal hell. During the ensuing, highly publicized divorce proceedings, Julian's family tried to use their massive, generational wealth and aggressive, shark-like corporate lawyers to intimidate, bury, and crush me. But they severely, catastrophically underestimated the lethal power of the airtight evidence I had collected, and they vastly underestimated Diane's absolute ruthlessness in the courtroom. When we finally went to court, the presiding judge was absolutely, visibly repulsed by Julian's actions. The text messages detailing their premeditated, sociopathic plot to steal my unborn child, coupled with the undeniable, medically documented fact of his physical abandonment of me in a hospital during a traumatic, life-threatening miscarriage to travel to Europe with a mistress, painted a picture of such profound, grotesque cruelty that the judge granted him zero leniency. Because of the hidden assets, the perjury, and the blatant financial infidelity, I was awarded the maximum possible settlement under the law. He was legally forced to buy me out of my half of the massive house at a premium, cover all my extensive 6-figure legal fees, and pay significant punitive spousal support. The mighty Kensington wealth couldn't save him from the absolute wrath of the family court system, but the social fallout was even more devastating, and far, far more satisfying to watch from afar. The Kensingtons obsessed over their flawless, philanthropic public image more than anything else in the world, but dark, juicy, or horrific secrets like that never, ever stay buried for long. The true, unfiltered, heavily documented story of exactly why the golden marriage ended leaked rapidly into their elite country club circle. The high society elite they prized so highly abruptly violently turned on them. Wealthy people might politely, quietly tolerate discreet affairs, but completely abandoning a miscarrying, bleeding wife in a hospital bed to take a mistress to Paris with the complicit, cheering in-laws crossed a line of basic human decency that even their most arrogant, morally bankrupt friends found entirely repulsive. Victoria became an overnight social pariah. She was quietly but firmly asked to step down from her prestigious charity boards, and her coveted invitations to the exclusive galas completely dried up. She was a ghost in her own kingdom. Julian and Elise's relationship, built entirely on the exciting thrill of secrecy and his mother's toxic approval, violently crumbled under the immense, crushing weight of the public shame, the hostile whispers at dinner parties, and the massive financial blow of the divorce settlement. Elise eventually left him for an older man, without so much toxic public baggage, leaving Julian entirely alone. It has been 4 incredibly healing, beautiful years since the day I walked out of that freezing hospital entirely alone. I live in a beautiful, sunlit, vibrant apartment overlooking a park in a city where absolutely nobody knows the Kensington name. I went back to my career in pediatric nursing, surrounding myself every single day with resilient, wonderful children who remind me of the pure, innocent, unconditional love I still have to give to the world. I went to intense, dedicated, years-long trauma therapy to properly mourn the loss of my baby, slowly, painfully, but successfully healing the deep, gaping wound they had tried so hard to leave infected. Sometimes, when the weather turns cold and the heavy rain hits the large windows of my apartment, I think about that sterile, beeping hospital room. I remember the suffocating darkness and the terrifying, paralyzing feeling of absolute, utter abandonment. But I don't feel pain, sorrow, or anger anymore. I realize now that the tragic miscarriage, as devastating and heartbreaking as it was to endure, was the universe's brutal, agonizing, but ultimately merciful, life-saving way of protecting me. It severed the absolute only permanent biological tie I would have ever had to a family of dangerous, soulless psychopaths. They truly thought they broke me by leaving me behind in the dark, while they flew to Paris to drink champagne. They didn't realize that in the pitch black, my eyes finally adjusted. I saw them for exactly who and what they were. I found the door, and I walked out into the brilliant, warming light, leaving them entirely to the miserable, paranoid, lonely, soulless existence they had so carefully built for themselves.